Good morning, everyone. My name is John Sears. I'm the Lean Coordinator for the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we talk about facilitating exercises on web-based platforms. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about with you today is we've learned a lot over the last 7 or 8 months since we've moved to an entirely online environment. And in order to do my job, I've had to adapt and learn and change with the times in order to facilitate the same type of lean exercises that we were doing in person, and now we're doing them online. And what that's meant is that we really can't do it the same way we used to. As much as we all love the sticky notes, I haven't touched a sticky note in more than 6 months. And while that's sad, it has led to a lot of interesting opportunities. And while it's changed the way we do business, it has not stopped our ability to do continuous improvement work. It's just changed how we do it and the tools that we use to do it. So what I'm going to be talking through today is primarily a walkthrough of 2 platforms that you can use to do your online facilitation, as well as the tools that we will be using in those platforms. So you can think of this sort of as 2 trainings within one, 2 half-hour trainings, one on Microsoft OneNote, and we're not going to go as in-depth in OneNote as you could. I do not consider myself a OneNote expert by any stretch of the imagination. We're just going to talk a little bit about the functionality of it, and we're going to be talking about draw.io. So go ahead and jump on the presentation here. So we're going to be talking about OneNote and some of the most common tools that we've been using on those platforms. So we're talking about SWOT, fishbone, or you might have heard it called the Ishikawa diagram. We're going to be talking about how to conduct both of those in OneNote. And then in draw.io, we'll be talking about SIPOC, which are we'll be going through that acronym, so don't worry if you don't know what that is, as well as how to do swim lanes. And if we've got time at the end, we might talk a little bit about concept board. That won't be a full-on demo. It'll just be talking about how that work can be done. But first I want to talk about facilitation in general. So I still think the most powerful way to have effective online meetings is through organization and having a structure to a meeting. So even though many of you are online, I still like the idea of let's all direct our attention to a tool. Let's work our way through it. Let's ask the kinds of questions and insights that we need to have productive, effective meetings. So I would say, and I've facilitated a lot of online conversations at this point, it's not harder, it's just really different. And some of the best practices and key insights that you could draw from watching somebody's face or talking to someone in person just don't really work as well online. So some basic tips that will apply to all of these tools and all of your online facilitations is make space. Sometimes it can feel awkward when you ask a question and no one answers right away. You need to learn to resist the urge to fill up that space, because sometimes it takes people time to unmute or to provide their responses. Also, what I found is that you can ask people directly, and that is really great because not only is it pretty easy to keep track of who's talked. Use the participants list in Microsoft Teams. You can see who's in your meeting at any given time, and you can scroll up and down and see it, even if it doesn't show everyone on your screen. And you can ask somebody directly a question, and it's great because they know you're talking to them. They can answer you directly. There's no risk of people talking over each other, and it's more powerful than just saying, well, does anyone have any questions? And then 6 people try and talk at once. Sometimes you have to do that when you have really large meetings, but there are other platforms to have those conversations. We're not going to talk about live events today, but live events are a thing that Microsoft Teams can do when you're dealing with very large groups. We're going to be talking about 2 of these today, which are use tools which can be shared on your screen. So we are using these platforms and I can share my screen and we can all talk to the same thing. So I've done a lot of work with just sharing my screen and just having everyone look at it while we're all talking and collaborating, and that's proven to be really powerful. If you are facilitating one of these online events, it's important to guide the discussion, but try and stay quiet. It's impossible to have multiple conversations going on at the same time. But as long as the conversation is productive and hasn't gone off the rails, try and stay quiet. I've seen people desperate to get rid of that quiet space and we'll just talk and talk and talk. It's tough to resist that urge, but I encourage you to try. And also, it's worth reminding people to use the hand raise feature. So in Microsoft Teams, we have the hand raise feature. It looks like a little hand. If you click it, you'll raise your hand and it will highlight you and say, I've got something to say. And if you're facilitating those events, make sure you're looking for those hand raises if you can, because it's a really convenient way for knowing who's got something to say. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into the various tools. So again, first half, we're going to be focusing on OneNote. Second half, we're going to be focusing on Draw.io. My plan is eventually to break those down into two separate pieces so that if you're just interested in one or the other, you can refer back to these as resources. All right, and let me go ahead and bring up the chat. Marcella added a tip that says, I've heard people say wait 7 to 10 seconds for folks to find their mute button and respond to a question. That's a great tip. All right, so first we're going to talk about SWOT. It's been one of my favorites, and it's really great because it is such a general tool, and it's for collecting feedback, and you can collect feedback on basically anything. And it's really easy to gather that information. So the premise is extremely simple. So you gather information from 4 distinct categories: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You'll notice that I have SWOT/TOES. TOES is SWOT backwards, but it is the often forgotten second son of SWOT, or daughter of SWOT. And what it's really great for is converting those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats into definitive strategies to deal with those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what I have found is that in a lot of cases when we were doing our facilitations, we would build things together. You put a bunch of people in a room, you take a lot of time, and you build something from the ground up. It is a lot harder to do that in an online environment. I try and keep my meetings under 2 hours under any circumstances. What that means is it's really hard to build something from scratch in an online environment. So what we've moved into doing is building something off of the meeting or with a smaller group, or having an individual create something and then sharing that and collecting feedback on the thing that's been created rather than building it from scratch. And SWOT is the primary way that we look at that and analyze that, whether it's doing a SWOT of what are the potential strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats by using what's been presented, or whether it's taking a look at the current situation, saying what are our current strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If SWOT seems like too much detail and you're trying to do something quick, you can use a plus delta. To me, a plus delta is like the most basic interpretive tool for assessing a thing. It's basically what works and what needs to change. So it's basically like strength and weakness, but the weaknesses are framed in terms of what do we need to change to make this more effective moving forward. And that's really just line down the middle of the page, plus and delta. So here you can see an example of them. So we did a SWOT at this point more than 2 years ago on the lean program within DEC. We collected a bunch of strengths and weaknesses, which are internal, and opportunities and threats, which are external. And in and of itself, a SWOT can help provide feedback on a thing, but it doesn't necessarily represent forward movement. The next step, the TOES, is where we really got involved and came up with some strategies. So what you do is you create a 2x2 matrix with strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This box represents what are some ways we can use our strengths to capitalize on opportunities. In this box right here, we talk about ways that we can use opportunities to negate our weaknesses. This box right here represents ways we can use our strengths to overcome any external threats. And this box right here is talking about barriers. What are our obstructions? What are the things that right now seem like they're high hurdles that we can't clear, that we need to clear if we're to be successful? And so this is a little bit of brainstorming, but it really comes up with some really great strategies that pairs off of the things you've already identified about your program. And Justin posted a really informative article on SWOT and TOES for later reading. I encourage you all to check that out if you've got the time. Thank you, Justin. So when you're leading this exercise online, we're going to be talking a little bit in OneNote. I'm going to show you how to do this, but provide an empty table, share your screen. I am often facilitating these exercises and sharing my screen. I find it helps keep me quiet as I'm writing down what people are saying and interpreting the discussion points that are happening into action items that go on the page. I encourage you to work around each category. I find things tend to slope towards pessimism. So getting people to focus on strengths or focus on opportunities is really the only way to get strengths and opportunities to show up. Otherwise, people will get fixated on opportunities and threats. Things to worry about is that people can get fixated on, is this a threat or is this a weakness? Because is it internal or is it external? Being knowledgeable about the subject matter can help, but really, you don't need to quibble too much over the distinction. You can always move things around, and in OneNote, that's really easy, and we're going to talk about how to do that. So focus on capturing the discussion. And when you're all done and you want to share the great work that the team did, it's very easy to distribute afterwards as an image, or if you're doing this in OneNote, you can also export it as text, but it's a little fuzzier that way. I prefer to export it as an image. The other tool that I like to use in OneNote, and Justin has done this also on the next tool we're going to talk about, which is draw.io. So you don't have to stick to the platforms that I'm mentioning. It's just the way I prefer to do things, and so that I have a justification to talk to you about OneNote and draw.io. You can obviously use whatever platform you're the most familiar with or comfortable with. So Laura LaPierre is asking about the whiteboard setting. Teams does have whiteboard coming, and this is why I'm glad Justin is here. Justin, do we have on the roadmap when the whiteboard functionality is coming to the state?
The best that I've heard is that that's going to be launched for commercial tenants in December, so potentially we'll see it in the first quarter of 2020. No promises.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Yeah, I know the whiteboard is coming. It's just a matter of when. Yeah, and Maureen added the new experience also has shared notes that everyone can see during a meeting. Yeah, those are great. So fishbone or Ishikawa diagrams is a tool for discovering root causes. What's really great about it is that a lot of times, and we talk a lot about the 5 whys, so it's basically something happens, you ask why. Justin just posted about this in the Greenbelt Network, so if you're a member of the Greenbelt, you can really dig into the 5 whys and some of the pitfalls and challenges of that. It was a really great article. Justin, thank you for sharing that. If anyone here is interested in following up on that 5 whys, but isn't a part of that group, I'd be happy to share it. But what's important about, what's a limiting factor of the 5 whys is that each factor just has one thing that it is downstream of. And what's great about the fishbone diagram is that there are a lot of contributing factors to a given problem. By default, the recommended category breakdowns of a problem are equipment, process, people, materials, environment, and management. All these are factors that can contribute to things not working as intended to various degrees. And obviously the principal components that break down off of them, you see you have a problem right here. You have these categories, and off of each of these categories, you have a primary cause and a secondary cause. You can have multiple causes within a category and multiple secondary causes, and you can even keep branching that. So off of that secondary cause, you could have a tertiary cause, and that tertiary cause can have a tertiary cause. So basically, you picture it as a branching 5 whys. So you can keep asking why and keep drilling down, but you can drill down in various categories. This is the purest form of the fishbone diagram, but there's no reason that you have to maintain these 6 categories. I've used iterations of the fishbone diagram where instead of using these default branches, we use other things that are more specific to the topic at hand. So if you're dealing with a software challenge, you could have one thing that's set aside for the platform, another thing that's set aside for the users. You can customize this heavily to fit your needs. And what's really powerful about it is that you're exploring all these different subtopics in order to go there. Amy is one step ahead of us and says it's critical to have the problem very well defined first. We're definitely going to get there. So here's an example of a Chromair challenge that we were trying to tackle in drinking water. I think Amy was here for this, where our problem was we were having trouble adhering to Chromair compliance, and it creates non-value added work. So you can see here we created these branches: Enform, Customer, Workflow, and Chromair itself. And each one of these had contributing causes. And what's great is because of all these breakdowns, if you were doing a 5 whys, you might just have, we're having trouble adhering to Chromair, which is the EPA's requirement for data. We can't adhere to it because the monthly operating reports don't work. Okay, then we ask, why don't the monthly operating reports work? And you sort of like see yourself going down that path where in reality, it's not just that the monthly operating reports don't work, but that there are many customers and compliance. There's tight time constraints or multiple copies floating around. There's multiple contributing factors, and a fishbone is great for capturing those. So when you're leading it online, you want to once again create a new page in OneNote, draw the basic shape with the primary limbs. Already having that ready is very helpful. Sharing your screen, as we've already discussed. And then, as Amy highlighted, define the problem clearly. And that's absolutely vital. The results that you get out of your fishbone diagram are only going to be as good as your definition of the problem. Now, it can be as specific or as broad as you want, but your categories should feed into that. And so just make sure you all agreed on what that common statement is. And I like doing that in the meeting, because if everyone doesn't agree what the problem is, then you're not going to get everyone contributing towards solving the right problem. I like to work around one limb at a time. So if you've got the pre-established categories, great, work one category at a time. You can start working and figure out what the limbs are as you go. That's a little bit tougher and requires a little bit more adaptability as a facilitator. But people are going to be firing fast and loose with all of the probable causes that they think are behind a problem. But encourage people to try and stick to one at a time. Write down people. I know a lot of people here are big fans of the parking lot. Absolutely use that to track down people's questions. And if it doesn't fit on one limb, absolutely come back to it. Then when you're done, you can export that figure. You can see this figure right here is just one that I dumped out of OneNote. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about OneNote demo, bicycle rack. So I want to talk a little bit about why I use OneNote as we hop into it. It's primarily considered a tool for note-taking. That's why it's OneNote. It has a lot of the same functionality as a whiteboard, which makes it extremely versatile. If you're not sure what type of platform you should be operating on, sometimes it pays just to be in OneNote so that you can adapt to any situation that comes up. It's got free association, so you can pick stuff up, move it around. Really, really flexible. You can incorporate tables, pictures, videos. You can collaborate on these so that you can put them online and share them like any other document. So I've built tools in OneNote and shared them with staff. It's my go-to place for having those kinds of discussions. So I'm going to go ahead and hop on OneNote. So if you've never opened OneNote before, the basic premise is that you have these tabs up here. You probably won't have as many as I do if you haven't used this before. You might just have one or two. But you've got these tabs up top that form basic groups. And then within them, you have these pages. So if you want to add a new section, it's very easy. You just hit the little plus section right there, and you can add a new one. If you need to delete a section, you can just right-click on it and delete it. We're going to function in our training section right here, and you could see I use the heck out of my OneNote. You can add individual pages. By default, it puts down whatever the current date and time is, and whatever you put in here is your header. So if I want to put online facilitation, I can go ahead and do that and spell it wrong. You can see that it automatically names the page over here. You can come back and see all the historical pages that you've created. You can have a lot of pages. For example, if I go to my quick notes, I use a handwritten notebook that allows me to scan it and upload it to OneNote. All of my notes are over here. I've got dozens and dozens of pages of handwritten notes that have been uploaded here. You can see that it hosts pictures very easily. So in this space, it is open to using however you see fit. If you just want to start typing, you can start typing. And you'll notice that it puts it by default in a box. You can pick that box up. You can move it around. You can go ahead and easily insert a picture. So if I wanted to upload a picture, I could do that. But it's more powerful than Microsoft Word in this respect, not just because it's flexible in terms of moving the text around, but also because you can upload more than just pictures or tables. You can upload videos, recordings. You can do printouts from email. If I have a very important email that I want to add as part of my OneNote so that I don't have to keep track of it in my box right here, I can go ahead and say, all right, so I'm working on a survey that Doug sent me, and I really want to, he sent me a list of departments that I need to use for a survey, and I really want to capture that. If I just click that and drag it in, I can attach either the file so that I can reference it later, or I can insert a printout. If I insert a printout, it will take the contents of that email and dump it out exactly as it appeared in my email. Go ahead and delete those. You can also convert things over into OneNote, although that functionality has changed a lot, and I don't want to try and find it right now, but there are better ways of doing that. I keep uncovering cool new things about OneNote. So as many of you know, I am recording this training as I record all of my trainings to go as part of the Lean Learning series. And so the Lean Learning series is available right here on Microsoft Stream. I'm going to go ahead and copy this link and drop it in the chat. But if I want to take this link and include it in my OneNote, something very interesting happens. So I'm just going to go ahead and post that. And you're wondering, like, what is it thinking about right now? And I really hope it doesn't freeze or die. Yeah, so all I did was post that link in there, and it has launched a widget that goes directly to Microsoft Stream. And if I hit play, it will actually open up a widget of Microsoft Stream of my channel in OneNote. So I can just go ahead and see all my videos right here. And what's wild is that you can click them and it will play the video in OneNote. And that's just wild to me. I keep discovering stuff like that. So if I'm over here and I really want to capture content from something else, so I'm going to go ahead and go to Justin's 5 Whys article, and I'm really interested in capturing the post hoc fallacy. And I go ahead and copy that text down and go ahead and drop it into OneNote. Not only will it post it and in the same formatting that it was available in, it'll also add the link, which is really great because now I can go back whenever I want and find that there. I do not consider myself an expert in OneNote. There is so much potential in here and so much flexibility. You can go ahead and using the draw thing, you can use it as just a whiteboard and start drawing. Adding arrows is very easy. Can very easily erase objects. So if I am interested in starting a new fishbone diagram, I can go ahead and open up a box. And if I start typing, it'll start typing right in that box. So why won't OneNote work? It's very easy to just start drawing my fish. And when you're facilitating this exercise, it's really easy to go back and, oops, I got to turn off my, because I want to go back to typing. I can just start typing. So if I want to call this category very, very easy to type, and you can change the width of any of these things. Really, the depth as far as how much customizing you can do is really staggering. So like category after category after category, we've got pictures, we've got colors, we've got highlighting, we've got tables. OneNote is really cool because one thing it's really great at is having these little checkboxes so you can make these things to do. It's really easy. All you got to do is highlight a list of items and you can make it. So let's go ahead and say thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. And all I have to do is highlight them and I can go ahead and add a to-do flag. So now I can check off any of these items individually. You can pair it, you can sync up your Outlook tasks and bring them in. You can use these different categories here to set priorities. It really is a big open platform for whatever it is you're trying to do. So if you're trying to do a SWOT, it's very easy to just grab a table and insert a 3x3 matrix. I was already in here, so it dropped it right in here. I can just go ahead and click anywhere, literally anywhere in this page, and I can go ahead and I can drop another table. Then I say strength, weakness, etc. And then it's really easy to, during our facilitated exercise, start listing off strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's really boundless, and I have just scratched the surface, but I wanted to give myself a half hour for each section. So that is my beginnings for OneNote. I encourage you all to try it out. Again, very easy to add a section. You can also pair in lots of other notebooks. So each of these notebooks has these tabs. Each of these tabs has a page. You can also have multiple notebooks, and you can have them all on easy access. So I've got my personal notebook here so that I can access it whenever I want, and it's easy to switch over. Exercises, online notebooks. You can grab notebooks from teams that you're on. So each team comes by default with a notebook, or can. You can share that here so that you can have it all in one place. Really, it's a one-stop shop for all of your personal note-taking needs. All right, enough shilling for Microsoft for now. All right, I guess I'll stop. Go ahead for a minute of OneNote questions if anyone has anything particularly pressing. If not, I'm available after to ask questions. I wish I was more of an expert in OneNote. Really, I've just begun to tap the potential of stuff that's here. I haven't even talked about the history tab. If you're interested in how I ended up with all of these handwritten notes in my OneNote, I'll talk to you afterwards about Rocketbook if you send me a message. Rocketbook's really cool. Okay. Waiting my 7 to 10 seconds. Or feel free to raise your hand or post your question in the chat. Yeah, Maureen, all I did was post the link to my OneNote, or to my post the link to Stream in my OneNote, and it brought up the widget. It works with forms. If you post a link to take a form in your OneNote, it will post the form in a takeable form on your OneNote. I'm constantly amazed by what happens when I paste stuff. All right. I did hit enter. You could try hitting enter and see if it that helps. Okay. So now we're in the draw.io phase. So we're going to talk a little bit about SIPOC. SIPOC stands for Supplier, Input, Process, Output, Customer. It's a tool for taking a 50,000-foot view of a process. It's not a details tool so much as it is a cataloging tool. It is really great for singling out problem areas or identifying key documents or people. And it's really, really powerful when coupled with, it's a great first step for a lot of things when you're just trying to wrap your head around the scope of what you're looking at. And we're going to be taking a look at one of these, but you can either group things by your process steps or have them listed out, and you'll understand what that looks like in a second. So here's an example of a SIPOC that I did with the wetlands program. We were taking a look at their permit application process, negotiation cycle. And you can see it's very simple. It's basically vertical categories of supplier, input, process, output, and customer. So generally speaking, the way I like to go about them is I start with the process. And these are not, if you've ever done any process mapping, this is not the same kind of process mapping. We're not interested in so-and-so sends it to so-and-so who does this, who does this. It's really about broad categories of process steps. So we're not talking, you could individually map out each one of these processes and it would probably take quite a while. So if we wanted to map out the permit application process for wetlands permitting, we could do that. But here we're just calling it one blanket step, which leads into the mitigation sequencing. Then we ask the question of, does it have an adverse impact to wetland value? If yes, then you start talking about compensation, which enters a negotiation phase, and you basically have this cycle that repeats until you've reached a satisfactory conclusion. Each one of these steps, so the mitigation sequencing is its own step, the negotiation is its own phase, it has these components in it, but the negotiation itself has a lot of back and forth and conversations and key points, but we don't cover them here. It's specifically meant to be more broad and all-encompassing. And you can see these little markers here that I put down that highlight areas of interest. After you've done the process, I like to go to input and then output. So input describes what are the things that are feeding in to the process. So what are the elements that have to be provided in order for the permit application process to begin? And what are the pieces that have to be provided as the application process is working? What are the elements that have to be considered when you're doing your mitigation sequencing? And it's okay if you don't know what those terms are. I barely do myself. The great thing about this tool is that you can facilitate it even if you're not a subject matter expert, because it's really all about capturing what people are talking about in these various categories. And you are going to go from process to input and then to output. So the permit application process takes a variety of inputs, and it's a process, right? So these things get filtered in through a pipeline. And then out of that pipeline comes outputs. So one of the things that is delivered from this permit application process is a technically complete letter and also a permitting status. So you're either granted permit or you're not granted a permit. You have a whole category of outputs that are generated by various pieces of this process. And then I like to jump to supplier. Some people go to customer, but who is providing the inputs and who is receiving the outputs? The goal is to be inclusive, to gather up all of that information. And when you look at it all together, you have a great scope. You know who your key stakeholders are. You know the key information that's coming in and leaving the process. You have a rough outline of the process steps. You probably have some idea of which ones need more detail, which ones you want to dig in further. So, for example, we had some questions that were raised about mitigation sequencing. Adverse impact to wetland value. Well, what does that mean? How do we define that? You can add these elaborative steps, and it really helps guide the next phase of your project. It's a really great starting point for discussion. When you are leading it online, what I just showed you was a template created in Visio. I really like Visio. It's a really powerful tool for doing this kind of work, but not everyone has Visio. But Draw.io is free, and everyone has access to it, and everyone can share files and use it. So Justin and I have created several templates. We have 2 separate ones for SciPoc specifically. It's very easy to open those templates in Draw.io and then share your screen so you're facilitating the exercise. Start with the process. Once you've got your process roughly mapped out, again, in those big broad steps, maybe you just have one category, maybe you have a handful. Then work on your inputs and outputs and finish with your supplier and customer. Because SciPocs can kind of be all over the place, it's important to single out participants and get everyone to participate. Be careful to notate the areas which need additional attention. Remember that the SciPoc is really a starting point. It's not going to solve any of your problems, but it might help you know where they are. When you're talking about distributing the file afterwards, you can share the .io file. Anyone with an internet browser can open it, but you can also export it. So if it's done and you don't need to work on it anymore, but you want to share the output, you can export it as an image. And I'll be hopping in Draw.io in a minute. But before that, I want to talk about swim lanes. So swim lane mapping is one of the most common tools that we practice in at least DEC, because it was one of the tools that the original consultant came in and talked to us about. Swim lane mapping is fairly straightforward, but can get really detailed in a hurry. So the purpose is to map out a process and to break it out by role. So it's really great for getting a handle on what is our current state process, eventually mapping a future state process. When you do that, what you really figure out is the flow of a process. So what happens first? What happens next? What are the decision points? Who does it go to? It's really great for identifying some key factors of waste in lean thinking. So where is there a lot of back and forth? Where are the feedback cycles? Where is something waiting a really long time? It's ideal for understanding the ins and outs of even the most complex processes. As long as you're rigorous about it, you can map out any process using process mapping. It's a great framework for understanding the timelines, understanding those loops or bottlenecks. And depending on how much work you're willing to put in, you can use it to identify value-added or non-value-added steps, as well as tracking how long things take. So value stream mapping is a variant of swim lane mapping. It looks sometimes radically different. And depending on who you talk to, they might hear different things they might picture different things in their head when you talk about value stream mapping. But you can use tools like this to balance workloads, figure out what the critical path is for timelines. There's a lot of potential that you really get out of a swim lane analysis what you put into it. And if all you want to do is capture what the current state looks like, you can do that. If you really want to dig in and figure out how long things are going, you can do that too. All right, so here's a quick example of swim lanes. Again, this is an example in Visio, but we're going to be talking about draw.io today, but I just wanted to show you what these can look like. I have these two, so each of these lanes represents a particular role. You always want to use roles, not people. But you explain the role and you explain what their role is in each step of this process. I've colored them green so I know who's internal and who's external. So you start with the process, then they enter things in the Y drive, and then they track the form on the sheet, and then they're tracking payment on that sheet, and they enter info into the database. Can you tell this is a before? This is a before flow, not an after flow. Enter the info into the database, and then generate the fee transmittal sheet, and then do the fee payment and planner status entered into Excel, and then that gets forwarded to the business office so they can enter it into Vision, and then the staff generates the progress report, and so on. It's really easy to follow what the decision points are in a flow chart and see who's responsible for each step because it's entirely dependent on the row that they're in. So this is one of the biggest ones where we've really had to shift up how we do things in an online environment because the way we used to do this was pretty classically, you'd get people together for a day or days, which you can't do online, and then you'd all get your sticky notes, which you can't do online, and then you'd put them on a big board, which we don't have, to draw the lines and have the discussions and work on the ins and outs, and everybody gets turn standing up at the board, writing down things on sticky notes, and that's fun and valuable and useful work, and I look forward to the day we can go back to it, but we really can't do that anymore. And it's almost hard to imagine at this point a bunch of people piling into a room and all touching the same stuff. So when you are using the swim lane, this is another one of those ones where there are templates. It's also really, really easy to do swim lanes in draw.io, and I'll be showing you that in a minute. And you can go ahead and open it and share your screen so you're facilitating this exercise. But what I like to do is I like to begin the mapping before the meeting. So I don't like to jump in and say, okay, what's the first step? Really what I like to do is if I have to capture it outside of draw.io, have people put it on a Word document, I like to have something to show everyone so that we can discuss it and walk through it and then tweak it and adjust it in that live environment versus having to do it in the meeting. Doesn't mean you can't, it just means a longer meeting, and people's attention spans for online meetings are really low, or people find other distractions. It's really easy to be on a meeting but also be doing something else. So I try and encourage people to have as short of online meetings as they can possibly handle, and one of the ways around that is by doing that pre-work, getting it mapped before you gather everyone together. You know, meeting with just one or two people, and even if you get an incomplete, likely incorrect version of the map, having that as a starting point and a discussion starter versus starting with nothing and staring at a blank screen and asking people, okay, what comes first? And you've got maybe a dozen people in that meeting, or maybe even 6 or 7. Even with 6 or 7, it can take a really long time, and some people are still not going to talk. So I really, really encourage you to have something come into a meeting with something to start with. So you want to augment the pre-built thing in the meeting, collect feedback, and tweak. So you can do that live. I find it's really powerful. One of the things that has been really great and that people seem to really appreciate is when you're doing it live in front of them and making those changes while discussing it, because it feels like you were really productive in that meeting because, oh, it's not, okay, now so-and-so is going to go do this thing, and then like a week and a half later they deliver something. It's live, it's active. It's very similar to the stuff we talked about for SciPoc, so making sure to single out participants. Depending on how many people you've got in a meeting, make sure everyone gets a chance to have their say. And you're going to do the same thing, notate areas which need additional improvement, and get everyone to participate. Afterwards, share the draw.io file or export as an image. All right, so we're going to be talking about draw.io. There are lots of mapping tools out there. This is the one that Justin and I have been using the most. It's free and relatively easy to use, and it's fairly versatile. So I'm going to go ahead and hop in. All right. So when you first hop in, it's going to prompt you with where you want to save your files. So you can save files locally using your device. The OneDrive stuff is a little hicky, but you can store the file wherever you want. You can always hit decide later if you don't know where you want to save it. You cannot collaboratively work on the same document at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit device, and I'm going to go ahead and open an existing diagram. So I've got a fishbone template right here that I created that was pretty ugly, and Justin did not like it. I'm going to go ahead and draw this process mapping template. So you can also create a new one. This is Justin's SciPoc template. So you can see right here, just like we talked about, here are the various process steps. One leads to another, leads to another. You can put a bunch of information in here if you want. And then you've got your inputs, your outputs, your suppliers, and your customers. You don't have to use a template, though, and you can create multiple tabs here. So this is for process mapping. You can see it's got the nice swim lanes. It's really easy to grab a swim lane and move it down. Sometimes the functionality of it is sometimes a little messy, but you can just double click in here and no, I don't want to save another copy. You could just start typing and it will rename the category whatever you want. So if I want to call this perimeter, I can do that and it will update the category. Is it really going to keep bugging me until I do that? All right, I'll save another copy. All right, now it should stop bugging me. If you want to add shapes in, it's really easy to just click one and drag one. You can drag it in to these rows if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and start a new one here just so we can sort of see what it looks like in an open environment. You can click these shapes in and bring them in. If you want to put some information in them, you can just start typing. It's really, really easy. So you notice if I mouse over it, and this might be a little hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in, but you'll notice that these little X's appear, as do these little faded arrows. If you want to connect up a couple of boxes, you can, if you click off a shape and then just mouse over it, if you mouse over any of these X's and then click, you can drag this arrow wherever you want. And if you drag it to another X, it will go ahead and it will connect it to another shape. So if I move this shape, it will move the arrow with it. If you click on an arrow and start typing, it will go ahead and put that on the line. Those little arrows that are kind of hard to see, if you go ahead and click them and there's another shape there, it will automatically connect it to the nearest shape in that direction. If there isn't a shape there and you hit that, it will prompt you for what shape would you like. Diamonds are typically the decision point shape. So is this good? If yes, I can just start typing yes, and then do something. If it's not, I'm going to go ahead and say don't. So you can see, do you have draw.io as an application in Teams? No, I do not believe so. But you can add websites into Teams tabs. I have not tried putting draw.io into a Teams tab, but that's an interesting idea that I might have to try sometime. So if you type draw.io into your bar, because I keep calling it draw.io, but it leads you to apps.diagrams.net. You can use either one. They're the same thing. but it's really easy to just click and add shapes in. This is Tom. I'm going to go ahead and put him on top of this high box. It's really quick. It's really easy. It does take some getting used to. What's really cool is in your templates, you can actually create scratch pads, or you can create your own personal scratch pads that have your favorite shapes in them. So these are the default shapes that I've been mostly playing with, and there are a lot of options there, but there are tons of shapes, tons of arrows. You can do things like you can color these. So if I want these boxes to be green to say that there is value here, I can do that. You can grab any one of these shapes and you can go ahead and make changes to them if you select them properly. It's really highly customizable. By default, I guess it chose green because I already had the green color selected. Okay, so I'm getting some questions about facilitation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there on the tools, and I'm going to leave some time for questions. Do you also use breakout groups? So Justin has been doing a lot of stuff with breakout groups. I haven't had the necessity in a while, but let me go ahead and show you some of the breakout group stuff that Justin has built, unless you'd like to talk about that, Justin.
Now, if you want to show it, that'd be great. There's a couple ways to do it. One of them is just setting up a number of Teams meetings on your calendar, and then sharing a link to those folks. So that would be one way to do it. The other way to do it, which John is showing, is if you're the owner of a team, you can create channels for your breakout rooms, which you can see there on the left. And then for training, what I do is I create meetings in those breakout rooms and then copy the link. So any meeting that you create perma exists. It never really goes away unless you actually click the end meeting button. Even if you leave, it's still there. So you can have breakout room links that last for weeks, months, years, and you can just keep reusing those links. I usually don't because there's conversations in there that I don't want to forget. But generally for each training, I'll just create new meetings, and then when we're in the training, I'll just post the link to those meetings. People just click and get them.
Maureen asks if real breakout groups are coming. I think that's on the roadmap. Justin, do you know what the time frame is on that?
Yeah, it's on the roadmap. It was supposed to be, well, it's supposed to be launched in November. We'll see if that time frame holds. My guess would be at least by the end of the year, we'll have that functionality. And when that comes, you'll be able to move people to breakout rooms and pull them back, just like you'd be able to do Zoom, as well as a couple other platforms. Google just launched it.
All right, thanks, Justin. So I want to answer the second part of Laura's question, which is how about working with outside entities when some people are just accessing by phone? So this is just a little bit about Teams. So Teams can be accessed by people outside of the organization. You can actually have people as guests who are outside the organization on your team if you wanted to do that. But anyone with an Office 365 account can get into a Teams meeting. And the easiest way to do that is to just create an Outlook meeting. And if you do a new meeting or hit new Teams meeting, it's really easy to add a Teams meeting link to any meeting. And all you have to do is share this link, and anyone should be able to access that. You don't even need an Office 365 account in order to access that meeting. The Teams app on your phone is really, really powerful. So even if someone doesn't have access to a computer, but they've got access to 4G, anyone can access a meeting on their phone. You can't, there's some limited functionality when it comes to live events using a phone, but for attending a meeting, your phone can work just fine, and you don't need a call-in number or anything like that. You can just use the T maps on your phone to access any meeting, and it's usually very versatile. And I prefer that too. Like some meetings where I don't have to participate in, I can go for a walk and listen to my meeting. Rebecca says 2 legislators were not able to join their Teams meeting when using iPads, but could on desktop. IT has been able to figure this out. Any ideas? Boy, I don't know. It might depend on the web browser that was being used. I would think if you were using Chrome on an iPad that you'd still be able to open the meeting. But I don't really know. Teams has issues with Safari.
Yeah, I can chime in. So that's a current issue with Teams is that it does not play nice with Safari. It is something that's on the roadmap that is being worked on. If you use Firefox or Edge or Chrome, generally you'll be fine, but Safari is somewhat dicey. My guess is if they're using an iPad, they're probably trying to join through Safari. They could download the Teams app, which would work just fine. But if they're trying to join in a browser, it's not going to work so well.
Yeah, my recommendation is to tell people to download the app. The app's actually really good. I found the connections to be fairly stable, even on 4G. And the functionality, sometimes it gets a little tricky if you get off of your meeting and then try and get back onto the meeting. You kind of have to find the rejoin the meeting link. But other than that, it's really, really good. So I encourage people to download the app on their phone. It's also not an obtrusive app, which is nice from Microsoft. All right. Any other questions? We've got about 2 minutes left. I want to make sure I have time for questions. If there aren't any, I can talk about affinity diagrams, but I wouldn't be able to do it justice. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and wrap there. If you have questions about Draw.io or using OneNote, I encourage you to reach out to me. I want to thank you all for your time, and definitely check out that link that I posted in the chat to Microsoft Stream. Thank you all so much for coming, and I look forward to talking to you all into the next Lean Learning series. So thank you guys all so much. I hope that was valuable. Try OneNote. It's really cool. All right. Thank you all for your time. Have a good day. Go forth.